Good morning, everybody. The February 23, 2017 Special Veterans Land Board meeting will now come to order. We have two items on the agenda. Before we jump in, need to state for the record that we have both Alan Johnson and myself here in Austin, Texas, and we have Andrew Kobos calling in from Houston, and we're holding this meeting in accordance with the Texas Government Code, Section 551, Tech 127, and under the Texas Department of Information rules and guidance, board member Andrew Kobos will be joining today's meeting via video conference. First item on the agenda, and I want to thank board members for making themselves available in light of everybody's busy schedule to make this meeting. First item on the agenda, as is always the case in our meetings, is approval of the minutes from our last meeting on January 26, 2017 for our last VLB board meeting. After the members of the board have had a chance to review said minutes and assuming no questions or comments at this time, I could entertain a motion to approve said minutes.
I saw no changes, so I'll move approval.
Second.
Motion is made, seconded, and carries unanimously to approve the minutes. And next on the agenda is the item that brings us together this morning, and that's consideration and possible action on the construction of a ninth home to be located in the greater Houston area. We have important updates that we need to provide the board and then make some important decisions within a short period of time. So I appreciate, once again, everybody's willingness to be able to come together for today's meeting. I'm not sure who will present from staff on. John Berkeley will be presenting on this issue.
Good morning, and for the record, my name is John Berkeley, Deputy Director for the Texas State Veterans Homes. In January of 2015, the VLB Vet Homes and Construction Services commenced with the planning and development of a ninth Texas State home for the Houston area. Jeff Kaufman, Deputy Director of Construction Services, had attended a NASVA meeting, National Association of State Veterans Homes in D.C., to meet with the VA and discuss the construction of the ninth home. At that time, he was informed that the VA was no longer funding the traditional semi-private, large 160-bed home, that the only design that the VA was approving is the small house model. And at that time, they also provided him costing guidelines that the VA uses to estimate the costs of projects in various states across the country. With that information, we retained Orcott Winslow, the architectural firm, because they work closely with the VA, and two, they've built 5 of the approved VA-designed homes across the country. The original VLB grant request was just short of $35 million, the VA share being 22.7, and the state share 12.2. As we proceeded to work on this project, our original site location was to be in Fort Bend County. However, the construction of that on that site was impossible due to the soils. Basically, it was so expansive that even with 20-foot pilings, it was still projected to move 2 to 4 inches a year. Wow. It's basically silt. And so we had to go into start looking for a new location. The criteria is that the land either must be state-owned or donated to the Texas GLO VLB for the purpose of a state veterans home. With government relations, general counsel, we were able to identify a parcel of property on South Loop 8 in Houston that belonged to the Permanent School Fund. But because it belongs to the Permanent School Fund, it could not be transferred to the VLB as state property. Government relations, general counsel, and the vet homes worked closely with the city of Houston, and the city of Houston agreed to purchase the property and donate it to the VLB. That was a $540,000 investment by the city of Houston. It was 18.5 acres. Our bid to the city was it was going to provide a $35 million investment, a state-of-the-art vet home, and serve 120 residents in a small house neighborhood community. And the facility would provide 140 to 160 full and part-time jobs. When we started to receive the initial construction bids for the property, it came in at 43% over budget. Due to the timeline for submitting our requests for the grant documents to the VA, we requested a conditional award, which provided us an additional 6 months to re-engineer and value engineer the property. That being said, the post-redesign and value engineering project estimate came in at $37,044,612, basically $7.3 million over our estimated budget. That puts our state share at just under $19.6 million. Actual cost of construction is actually about 250 square feet. The VA construction guidelines still only show 195 square feet. The primary driver for the higher cost, construction material, but in general, the cost of steel. The state has two options. It can withdraw its grant request and refile with higher cost estimates. However, that would put the start of construction for a home in the Houston area at a minimum of 2 years out, and opening of the home for 4 years or longer, based on when the VA would finally approve. Also, the VA has not adjusted their construction estimates to reflect the higher cost of construction. But most importantly, it would mean that the most underserved veteran population will continue to be underserved. You know, the cost is higher than anticipated. We do not believe the fund will be depleted. Each year, additional $2 million is added to the fund. Also, the draw on the funds for construction is over a 2-year period, with the highest draws coming 18 months into construction. The VLB Vet Homes and Construction Services will also reduce other grant requests for the next 3 years, which will add an additional $4 to $5 million to the fund. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
I have one. So we've been doing the semi-private room concept, and VA doesn't like it anymore.
No.
We're going to a small house model. How does that small house model, how is it designed now to, as opposed to the semi-private concept?
It's basically a mix between the small house model of Tyler and the traditional unit, in that the design is all under one roof, but it's an H shape, and each wing will have 30 rooms, but 10 room neighborhoods off each one with central dining areas, and will allow for, we've learned from Tyler that there are certain things that you need to have the economies of scale, especially centralized kitchen, you know, shared services with your staff, housekeeping. It's all air-conditioned space. One of the complaints we receive many times from Tyler, they don't like the fact that they have to go outside to go to visit their friends in other homes. So
it's still one building?
still one building, sir.
Okay. Okay.
But they're all full private shower and bath.
And this new site that we have, the soil tests are good?
Yes, sir. And by securing that site, the value that was added by putting the infrastructure in for our home will add about $5 million to the remaining of the property that belongs to the permanent school fund.
I may, at one point, want to ask Rusty kind of break down, but before we do that, I wanted to just get an update in terms of your work with Kaufman and kind of renegotiating what we can. I mean, what authority does the board have or staff have in terms of continuing to renegotiate the terms and getting the cost of construction down, or is this pretty much an ironclad deal that we have already committed to in terms of the construction costs?
We have value engineered it down to the point where if we go further, it would be a total redesign, which would start the whole process over. And from where we started, I mean, as we said, it's gone from an Escalade to a Suburban. It's just a basic home. We've tried to cut out as much fluff as possible, a lot of dual capacities, and feel very confident that this is probably the best design we can get at the cost. Again, construction is booming in the Houston area, and that was a major factor, plus the price of steel.
Does VLB still have to cover any additional cost overrides, assuming, let's say, this is the final figure? Do we run the risk of this project going to $40 million, $50 million?
Mr. Kaufman has put in, I believe, about $700,000, if not more. There's I think, a 20% or 10% retainage. Rusty would have that number for us. So he does have a discretionary funds to cover any overrides.
what legal authority do we have at the board level to, or staff again, to pull out of a development in the event that the cost overrides reach a point where this no longer becomes a sensible program for our vets?
I would have to defer to council on that.
I just want to know, like, what other options we have. If, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the other board members, but let's say hypothetically we do choose option 2, move forward on the commitment that we've made publicly and internally within the agency. What options do we have in the event things go right? I'm kind of a Debbie Downer at times, so I just want to think through all the worst case scenarios and what our options are.
Sure. Anthony Vargas, Office of General Counsel. At this point, we have no commitment to the Veterans Administration until we submit the application on March 1st, if we do move forward. So right now, there's no commitment, but if we do submit that application and enter into an MOA with the Veterans Administration, any funds that we would receive would be subject to recapture from the Veterans Administration.
So are we doing this thing under a construction management basis or a fixed cost contract?
This would be a fixed cost contract, I believe, and John may have more insight on that.
Right.
Yeah.
We have a lock-in price that, I think it was a 90-day lock-in price that we
Right.
have with the construction company that bid on the project.
So if it goes over, the contractor eats it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Do we have legal authority to hire and fire construction partners, or?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a contractual relationship, so we went out to bid for this particular contract through the competitive bidding process. This was the best value contractor. Went into negotiation with the contractors that responded to the solicitation, and this one came in at the lowest, best and final offer price. So as John mentioned, we have done extensive negotiations with this contractor, and if for some reason there is a breach of contract or failure to expeditiously construct the project, then we could terminate the contract and hire a new contractor. So there are those contractual remedies available to us.
How much, what was the difference between the final bid and the next bid up, cost-wise? What I'm looking for
Yeah.
is, are we going cheap and have in a problem?
No, I believe there was a spread between $2 million, $4 million between the 3 bids that we received. John
It
may
was-
have the
I don't
numbers
have
specifically, and we can definitely get back to you on that.
Numbers, but it was in a very tight range.
Yeah.
Was it, okay?
It was a close range, so there definitely was not one that was clearly much lower than the rest. And in addition to considering price, there are also other factors that go into this, such as the contractor's qualifications and experience and ability and capacity to construct the project. So there are other considerations besides price that go into a best value consideration.
And we've fully vetted this contractor to know that he can and will perform.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Taking a step back to first paragraph in the details on design being approved and funded by VA pursuant to the small house model, there's no way to gain an exemption if we went directly to the new VA secretary, or, I mean, is that?
That would
Pretty
be
much
speculative at this point,
Speculative.
and given our tight timelines with filing the application, we're already on a 6-month conditional application period, and that expires on March 1st.
Maybe at this time we can ask Rusty to talk just about, how much will be left in the reserve fund. Maybe a bearish and a positive
A bullish and
case
bearish
scenario
and
in terms of what,
Sure.
in terms of planning out moving forward, and any thoughts, additional thoughts you may have.
Sure. I have a little spreadsheet here that I'll share with you. For the record, I'm Rusty Martin, Chief Investment Officer. So this is a spreadsheet that has a simplified picture of the way that I'm looking at this. And Andrew, I sent you this by email, so you should have received this.
I have it pulled up on my computer. Thank you, Rusty.
Absolutely. So if we just look at the surplus fund itself, we have a surplus fund that we created, and we periodically move excess monies from the operations of the homes into the surplus fund with the idea that the surplus fund will be used to build or pay for construction costs related to new homes in the future. So at this point, that surplus fund has about $18.8 million in it. So if you assume that our share of the cost of the construction of the new home is $19.6 million, which was indicated by John, that means that we're about $800,000 short in the surplus fund of being able to fund 100% of our cost, our share of the construction. Now, keep in mind that money will go out over probably an 18-month period, whatever the construction period is, and then the time it takes to get the FF and E inside the building also. So we'll call it 18 months. So the program itself throws off equity to the tune on average of about $2 million a year. So over the next 18 months, we would expect that we would add another $3 million back to that fund. So at the end of the period, there would be a balance in there of a couple of $1 million. The operations itself, looking at the bottom portion of the sheet there, you'll see that there's about $16 million in cash at the Treasury right now. However, there are pending invoices of about $11 million, reimbursements to the land fund from each of the older homes on a repayment basis. Basically, it leaves about $3 million as an operating cushion in the operations fund. There is no hard and fast rule about what that number should be. I like for it to be between $4 and $5 million, and that's typically where it is. So the picture that I'm painting to you here is that I don't see any negative impact, certainly to the operations of the fund, assuming, of course, that there are no significant cost overruns. If the project proceeds on a path that results in the expenditures being equal to what they're forecast to be, the picture that I see is we will slowly start rebuilding the surplus fund. By the end of the period, we should have around between $2 and $3 million in surplus fund, and we should be able to have operations fund balance increase up to what I would call a normal operating range of $4 to $5 million. The only issue is if there's something unanticipated that comes up, and it demands a lot of money to be drawn all at once. It hasn't happened in the past. Hopefully it won't happen in the future, but it is something that could happen. If that does happen, we do have a remedy. We are legally allowed, the board is legally allowed to determine that there's excess money in either the Veterans Land or Veterans Housing Assistance Fund, and then can transfer that money to the Veterans Homes Program. It's never been done, but that option is available if there is an emergency and we just don't have the cash to cover it.
How much money's there right now
In
that
the
emergency fund?
the Land and Housing Assistance Fund?
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, there's a lot of money in those funds. They have over $300 million in equity. Yeah, there'd be plenty of money. It's just the board would have to officially take an action to do that.
And we would borrow that money and pay it back to the assistance fund?
Yes, that's what we've done in the past. Early in the program, when we used money to build new homes, we set up a de facto debt service schedule for each home, and they are currently repaying the fund now. So that's typically what we do.
That gives me some comfort.
But suffice it to say, I mean, and this may be more of a question for John, but in light of, what we're discussing here, it's safe to say that the development of a new home would be off the table potentially for a decade, correct? Just in light of...
Sure. That is the main result of depleting the surplus fund. If, in fact, every home that we build from now on is going to cost $20 million or more, you can do the math. At $2 million a year, it's going to take you 10 years to replenish the fund to be able to build a new one. So you are certainly pushing far into the future any possible construction of another home after this one.
But if we don't build it, and we, say, move to another area, it's still gonna be the same money, right?
Not necessarily. My understanding is that some of the cost is specifically related to Houston itself and the state of the construction industry in Houston itself and demand there. So there would be some moderation, I would think, depending on where you might build it. But generally speaking, if the VA is going to insist that this model that they've recommended is the model that they're going to fund, then yes, you are tied to that model if you want to participate in the grant program. And it's still a great program. They do pay 65% of the cost. The issue here is, it's a mismatch between what they said should cost and what it actually is going to cost.
And another item potentially that we'd have to take off the table is any further reduction that this board has recently authorized on costs within the homes for the vet itself, potentially.
Potentially, and again, depending on what kind of unanticipated things may arise, you would be reducing your flexibility with regard to resident room rates because, as you know, we have always strived to hold those unchanged or even reduced them. A couple of years ago, we reduced them. So certainly, for some period of time, I think your flexibility would be reduced somewhat if and until we can see how stable the program is going forward once that money starts going out.
What's the closest home to Houston, to the Houston project?
Either Floresville or Temple.
Where? Floresville or Temple? Okay. In your memo, John, there's a statement in there that talks about the most underserved veteran population. Is that reflective of the Houston area?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do we know how many bodies we'll see jump in there right away? You think we'll hit 100% census?
I think it'll fill within 6 months, which is, for a nursing home, is exceptional. We could have, based on, when we were looking at the traditional home, we were looking at one of our existing models and possibly adding on a wing. We could have built up to a 300-bed home to meet the need in the Houston area. But based on what the VA is funding, all we could afford was a 120-bed.
With all the changes going on right now with the Trump administration, we've got a new VA secretary I was watching this morning on news. Any chance that some of these policies might change that would give us additional funding? No?
It's a
Do
speculation.
you think the bureaucracy is too stuck? That's what I think.
Right now, there are only typically 2 to 3 homes are funded per year at most across the country. Most of the VA funding is going into life safety code and ensuring that the existing homes have the up-to-date technology that they need to operate. So the funding for new vet homes is limited at best, and I don't see it compared to everything else in the VA. That's a small number for them. I don't know if there would be a lot of emphasis to change it on the VA's part.
What are the chances that we build this home, we have a different rate structure for it as opposed to the other homes because of the cost?
Oh, it would definitely have it. It
We
would be
would.
similar to Tyler. It would have a different cost structure.
One that would recover our money faster? Or does VA dictate that? I know VA gives us X amount of dollars per room, and we kick in the rest. And what are the chances of us having a 20%, I'm picking a number out of the air, 30% higher room rate from our standpoint?
So you're not asking me to foretell the future, are you? The Tyler room
Just for
rate.
this home, though, I'm just.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that this home is going to have a different rate. It's going to be more expensive to be in this home. The Tyler home is significantly more expensive than any of the other homes. This one will be too. Unfortunately, I have no idea how much it's going to cost, what the resident room rates are going to be, because in order to determine that, we have to have an operator, and we have to have a contract negotiated with them. We have to have some kind of a cost structure, and we have no idea what that's going to be at this time. It's premature to talk about that. I will correct one thing that you said. The VA basically pays 50% of the cost per day. The resident pays the other 50%. We don't pay it.
Yes, you're correct.
Well, what is the next priority geographically for a home after Houston?
Based on need, it would probably be into the Dallas area and then back into Houston, just because there were so many unmet in the Houston area.
Okay. So if we build this home and deplete the reserves, and it looks like we have a 20-year window until we're able to build a new home, if we see that the administration is changing its priority and is going to allocate and shore up more funding, then our projection of having a 20-year wait period, a 20-year stay before we build the next home might change. And so that's not something that, even though we can't forecast what the administration is going to do, if those changes are favorable, then we can take advantage of them.
That is correct.
And one of the statements that Houston is the most underserved veterans population, what is it based on?
It's based on the number of.
What considerations go into assessing how well served a geographical area is?
It's based on the number of the veteran population in that area, and the fact that there are no VA state VA homes in that area compared to the population. It's also based on the VA sends out a map basically identifying the highest densities of veteran population. Houston is the highest in the state of Texas.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, a couple more questions. The city of Houston's already bought the property. Have they transferred it to us yet? They have transferred it to us. What happens if we say, sorry, city of Houston, these costs are too high because of your geographic area, and we move out? We've already moved from Fort Bend to Harris County, correct? Right?
Yes, sir.
What happens if we move one more county to the west or one more county to the north? Does that affect the cost?
It might affect the cost, but it would also require us to totally refile the entire project. We were limited to Fort Bend, Harris County, and Brazoria County.
And if I may speak on that, there are restrictive covenants that run with the property that the city of Houston donated to the VLB. Essentially, those mirror the VA requirements that we operate the home on that tract for 18 years. If we do not build and operate a home on that tract, we may be subject to repaying the city of Houston the value of that land. And
Could we not deed it back to them?
we could deed it back to them, but part of that deeding back to them would be repaying.
Repaying.
The $540,000.
The only incentive that they had.
Giving it back to
yeah.
them, you're giving them back $540,000.
The only
in
incentive.
value, you
yeah.
hope.
The only incentive that they had to purchase the land was the partnership with the Veterans Land Board to build a veterans home there. Whether they would accept the land back is an open question.
Boy, howdy.
Going back to the operator discussion and question, to the extent we go through an RFQ process, we select the operator, at what point or how do they receive their initial payment? And is that coming out of surplus as well, or that's strictly going to come out of operations, correct?
Right, we're funding operations 100% out of the overall cash flow in the program. That's how I expect that to happen.
So the fund discussion would not relate to the selection of the operator. Once we deliver the actual home, complete that, start bringing in residents, correct?
That's correct. There would be no hit on the surplus fund.
You know, I was all for doing this gig until you said so many years out before we can do another one, and I personally think that aside from the housing program, this is a jewel. I mean, this is something we do and we do well, and really serve the aged veteran. I'm on the fence now.
I'm a little confused about the 20-year window now that Alan brings it up, and that is that if we defer building this home and we decide next year or 2 years from now to build another home, isn't that money going to come out of the same pot? And isn't there going to be a 20-year stay before we can build the next home after whichever the first home is that we build?
Alan, I don't know where the 20-year number came from. We were talking about a
10-year number.
10-year.
10.
Yeah.
I think Andrew said it. Don't blame him. I
If
think
it,
you said it.
if the fund is replenished at $2 million a year, and we're required to spend $20 million to build the next home, it would take about 10 years to replenish the fund. 10 years, not 20 years.
Okay, but there's still going to be the same period of time, no matter if we build this home or if we decide to wait and build the next home. We're still looking at a period of time, and the period of time is going to be the same.
Between construction of a home now and another home.
Between construction of this home and the next home, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Unless there's a significant difference in the amount of money that accumulates.
I think
All right.
I think what makes this 10-year deal the sticking point is because of the significant cost of building one in the Houston area. In other words, if we went
If
2
the cost
counties
is-
over and it was less money, it could be a 5-year window.
That's true.
Let me ask one question related to that, and this is Mark Havens for the record. The cost, when we look at VA funding, it's not site-specific. They keep raising the standards of what they're requiring us to build, but they won't raise the accompanying funding. So if we look at costs here, there are some specific costs associated just with construction sites in Houston that are specific to Houston. But if we were to go to some other area, the VA funding would remain the same. Is that correct?
That is correct. And also, too, if you go to an area that has a smaller population, it's going to take a much longer time to fill. So that's going to have to be consideration as well. The other states, when you compare, we get the charts from the VA that talk about the cost of construction of homes. Most of the VA homes now that you're seeing are constructed are now in the $50+ million range. We're still under that, and I've even had representatives from Florida call me and want to know how we can build a home in Texas for the price that they're showing on the VA paperwork. So,
Because we have good government.
And it's Chief Clerk for the record. Rusty, may I ask you a question related to the rate of replenishment? You've got it pegged here at about $2 million every year. Is there any way to change that based on internal modeling or anything like that as it relates to maybe not funding other capital projects or going out for other VA grants at the same rate that we have in the past in order to up the amount of dollars that go into the replenishment on an annual basis?
Well, it takes into account what I would consider normal expenditures that are required in the homes for, for example, CapEx and maintenance and things like that. That's taken into consideration. We already keep a pretty tight rein on that amount, so I don't, we would not want to put ourselves in the position of making cuts that may reduce the efficacy involved in the quality of care that we're providing.
Certainly
So
not.
that, I would say that it reflects a reasoned a vision of what the costs are going to be going forward. We could raise room rates. That would increase the revenue, but I don't think there's much appetite to do that. But if you're talking about increasing revenue so you can increase the pace at which the equity builds in the program, short of raising resident room rates or coming up with some significant way to cut existing cost, there's no other way to do that.
It's the hour of decision.
It is the hour of decision.
One other point I wanted to make, if you don't mind, regarding what Andrew was asking about, the 10-year period. If you build this home and you want to build another home 4 years from now, 2 years from now, you do have the option, as I said earlier, to declare money in the land or the housing fund as excess money and use that for the construction, and then set up a de facto debt service schedule to repay the land or the housing
And how
fund.
do
You
we-
could do that if the demand is there and you feel the need to do that. You have the option to do that. You just have to take that action.
How do we determine the debt service? How do we determine what that is? What interest rate we pay? Do we peg that to LIBOR or to prime or?
You
we just pick
really
a
want
number
to
out
have
of the
that
air?
discussion? Typically, what we do is we peg it at our opportunity cost on the portfolio, on the investment portfolio.
Well, that's reasonable enough. Yeah.
And if we were to pursue that as and I know this is getting beyond kind of the topic of what we need to vote on, but good to lay it out now and have this discussion, I think, while we're all here. How would that legally be structured? Would the VLB need to draft an agreement to that effect to basically create a repayment plan over time if we wanted to build Home 10 and enter into a debt service payment structure over 10, 20 years? Or
Typically, what we do is the board adopts a resolution declaring an X amount money as excess money not needed for the purposes of the program, and then is transferred to the Veterans Homes Program. The repayment is unofficial. There's no requirement that the money be paid back, but the policy has been to set up a de facto debt service schedule and pay the money back over, just like a bond issue. You have a
One
debt
more
service schedule.
question. Counsel, is it your opinion that we should not think about giving the property back and going someplace else? I'm gonna put you on the spot.
That's a pretty tough question. There are a lot of considerations in that. Number one,
Legally speaking, not
legally
economically.
speaking, there's an open question as to whether or not the city of Houston would take the property back. So that would be the legal issue that comes into that. Other considerations include our
Deed restrictions.
deed restrictions, our relationship with the city of Houston. We've worked as a partnership thus far on this project. Pulling out now would leave that partnership in limbo. And there's also the consideration of the VA funding cycle that is a deadline of March 1st. So those are the considerations of moving the project to another location.
I would say, to summarize that worst case scenario, our outstanding damages, so to say, if we were to not go forward with Houston, is the $540,000 purchase price, and then I believe $60,000 roughly that the city has funded as well for some utility easements in there. So it could be that worst case scenario we're out $600,000 on this, and that's just a straight pull out. We're not going forward with Houston. It could be that it's nothing. We could work some agreement out where they take the track, but just out there, it's likely 600,000 would be the worst. And then the timing, I don't know what the timing would be if we were to decide to go forward at another location with availability of the VA funding.
That would require a total repackaging, and you're estimating 2 to 3 years in order for it to be approved, then another 2 years out plus construction. It would have to be in an area that the VA also determines as underserved. So again, looking at Houston being the most underserved and then the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I don't know if we'd have any cost savings by moving the project to Dallas-Fort Worth area, and even moving it too far outside of Houston, the travel restrictions for the elderly become more complicated for trying to visit their loved one who's now 2 counties over. That does create quite a hardship on the family as well.
I say yes.
All right.
Ask him if that's a motion.
Well, I may need to have council state the language in which we need to move on in order, because we've completed the consideration component of the agenda item, but in terms of action on the construction, may need to call upon council to kind of lay out some language that we can move forward on.
Yeah, I guess it would be,
Because in the memo, it states, state has two options, but sadly on the second option,
Okay.
The proposed motion would be, Mr. Chairman, motion to approve the construction of the 9th Texas State Veterans Home in Houston, Texas, at an increased cost to the Veterans Land Board, where the previous estimate was $12,221,963, to the new estimate of $19,593,621. So in summary, the motion is to approve the construction of the 9th Texas State Veterans Home in Houston, Texas, at the increased funding amount of $19.6 million would capture it.
anyone want to make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
And I will second it and just say I'm comforted by the fact that we can go get additional money if we need it, Rusty, from the assistance fund. Don't go anywhere. Second.
Motion is made, seconded, and carried unanimously to approve item number 2. And to be clear, I'm in support as well. I think that board will have to look closely in terms of what room rates will be needed on the Houston home to help replenish the surplus fund and think of creative ways in which we can look forward towards the future in terms of the 10th home. But I think we had a really healthy discussion. I want to thank everybody for being a part of it, particularly council. And there being no further business and no other comments, questions at this time, this meeting is hereby adjourned.